Welcome to Strategic Thinking, Reading, and Teaching Part 2. We're going to revisit the strategies proficient readers use, and we're going to do that by looking at a variety of ways these have been identified over time. This is a list of some key researchers, and notice we've got real live kids in here and real live adult readers. They are key researchers. So if you look at all of the lists that these various people, researchers, and real live readers give, you will find some commonalities. Think back to what you wrote after you read the difficult piece of text by Palmero in Module 1. What strategies did you use when you encountered hard-to-read material? And in your postings, Read and Reflect, a lot of you identified the exact same strategies that we were talking about. You asked questions, you made predictions, you stopped and went back and reread. You did all of those and more. So, strategies. Here's what the children say. So, asking Regie Routman over time, I believe over about 10 years, she asked children all across the country, what do good readers do? And the list they came up with is here. They said, when I read, I clarify, I connect to what I know, I reread to make sense, I visualize, I summarize, I ask questions, I predict, and I hypothesize. And then when we look at over 30 years of research on reading comprehension, what the experts say, we find that consistently they say that good readers relate the new to the known, or make connections. They monitor for meaning. They know when they have stopped making meaning. They determine importance. They synthesize. They infer. They ask questions. And they create sensory images. The list, if you compare this to the list that the children have come up with, they're very, very similar. So if we break these down and we pull in all the different lists that everybody has come up with over time, they pretty much always have the same big strategy topics. So making connections is a big one. Underneath that would be things like activating prior knowledge and using schema. Remember, schema and prior knowledge, similar things. Setting a purpose for reading, making inferences, asking questions, creating sensory images, determining what's important, and all of these pieces fall under that. Synthesizing, this is a much higher level than summarizing, in that you are combining what you know with what you've read, and you're using higher level thinking skills to look at the reading. Building vocabulary, and then specific to reading, to literacy, some of the strategies are fluent reading, and please don't take this to mean reading as fast as you possibly can. This means that you are able to read the text in a uninterrupted, smooth manner, and that you can, you're not being distracted by the decoding that's going on. It doesn't mean you're reading as fast as you can, which some schools have taken fluent reading to be. Understanding written language. So what are different access features, subtitles, titles, that we need to know to get into text, and what's text structure, and we'll cover that later. But again, a structure of a novel is totally different from the structure of social studies, which is different from the structure of mathematics text. And then self-monitoring for meaning. You know when you hit a bump in the road and you go back. And we're going to talk about these things more specifically now. So throughout the reading process, an active reader will relate the new material to the known material in their head. They will activate prior knowledge, and they'll make connections. Readers use prior knowledge, information, and experiences stored in the mind to make meaning from a text. Remember schema we talked about. Each of us brings a unique set of experiences and knowledge to the reading event, and we use those to make a new meaning. There are 3 types of connections that you will read about in the literature that you want to keep in mind that are important to know when you're helping your children develop connections. Students, readers, anybody will make text-to-text connections, and that is when you connect something you're reading with something you've read before. They also will make text-to-self connections, and that is when you connect something you're reading or viewing to something you know in your head, something you've experienced, something you carry with you. And they also make text-to-world connections, and that's when you make a connection between something that's going on in the greater world around you to something you're reading or viewing. Another strategy is self-monitoring for meaning and repairing faulty comprehension. So I love the picture for this because a good reader will monitor and fix comprehension. If you get a flat tire, you don't keep driving, you stop and fix it. A good reader knows that if they don't understand what they're reading, they stop and they use other strategies to figure out what they're reading. They don't just keep on going. Usually, when meaning breaks down, they stop and reread, they use context clues, they clarify, they pause to retell or summarize in their head, they adjust their reading rate, which is why it's very dangerous to push fluent reading as fast reading, because a good reader will adjust their fluency level, their reading rate, depending on whether they're understanding or not. Determining importance is another strategy, and that is recognizing the main idea and supporting details, distinguishing less important ideas from main ideas in the text. One of my favorite examples of how sometimes students don't have this is when I taught 4th grade, I asked a student to highlight the important ideas with a yellow highlighter. It was her first experience with a highlighter. Well, she highlighted the entire text. To her, everything was important. She did not know how to distinguish less important ideas from the main ideas. And that told me a lot about that particular strategy and that particular child. Synthesizing information and summarizing while reading is putting the pieces together to generate new ideas and build on existing concepts. So you blend what you already know with the new information and you come up with this new and expanded thought process. You evaluate text and determine why a text did or did not appeal to you, and you recognize various purposes for reading. There is a bit of a difference between synthesis and summary. And I want to read this quote from Mosaics of Thought because I think it captures that difference quite well. A summary is a listing of the parts, and a synthesis is the creation of a whole. It requires real creative critical thought. In a way, it's a matter of bringing together different ideas and facts from the text and from the reader's experience, and weaving them together in a tapestry, something larger and more complete than all the threads. Synthesis is about organizing the different pieces to create a mosaic, a meaning, a beauty, greater than the sum of each shiny piece, whereas a summary, you're simply taking the pieces and relating them back or putting them together. You're not adding new pieces to it. So summarizing and synthesizing can be seen as two different parts, but both are important strategies. Drawing inferences based on the text, you predict, you draw conclusions, you identify underlying themes and messages, and you fully integrate what you've read into your knowledge base. And this is one of those puzzles. So if you haven't got it yet, you've got the word read and 2 lines, read between the lines. So a good inferring person uses the clues and their schema to draw inferences. Asking questions. Unconsciously ask questions of yourself, of the author, of the text, and you do this before you read, while you're reading, and after you're reading. You generate I wonder questions and you engage in critical thinking while you're reading. And a lot of times we really have to push our students to ask questions, because if you ask them, what do you wonder, the first thing you get is nothing. Well, there's always wondering there. We just have to dig down and find it. Creating sensory images. I found my research when I did my dissertation was on nonfiction and student perceptions of nonfiction, and one of the most interesting little side pieces I found was that some of the young men in the 4th grade class who loved nonfiction, especially history, social studies, were very adept at visualizing from the text they were reading. So they were experiencing the text on a totally different level than some of the other children I talked to who read the words and got the facts, but they were not identifying with the situation. They weren't putting themselves in the moment. So it taught me how very important the ability to take the text and actually stop and think about, what am I seeing, what am I hearing, what might I be tasting or smelling, to feel it physically and to feel it psychologically and make it a part of what you're doing. Building vocabulary, especially in the upper grades, where readers are bombarded by new and unfamiliar vocabulary words. When you read the Palmero text, I'm sure you noticed a lot of vocabulary words in there. A well-developed vocabulary and strategies to understand new vocabulary are critical to successful reading. So not only do they have a good vocabulary, but when they do hit words they don't know, they're very good at word study, and they're taking those words apart and trying to figure out what they are. And they also know that sometimes you have to stop and go look a word up. Developing fluency. Middle school students who read in a halting word-by-word manner and who struggle with phrasing and expression and reading in meaningful chunks are at great risk of being turned off by reading. And of course they are. They're not enjoying the experience. They're focusing on decoding at that point. And they have not understood, they've not reached the understanding that reading is supposed to have a meaning, have meaning to it. So fluency is I can read accurately with expression and understand what I read. It is not I can read at the speed of light. So just remember that. Good readers can change their reading rate, they can read in meaningful chunks, and they read smoothly and use phrasing and expression easily. Even those of us, if you were to try to read the Palmero article that I gave you in Module 1 with fluency the very first time, you couldn't have. The second time you probably could have. You probably wouldn't have been reading it with understanding, but you would have read it smoothly. Recognizing purpose is another strategy. Recognize various purposes for reading: enjoyment, completing a task, a personal interest, answer questions. There's a reason you read. You don't just read because it's something you have to do in school. And you evaluate your own enjoyment and engagement with the text. You're aware that some texts appeal to you and some do not. And you understand written language. You know how to use text features like headings, bold words, charts, graphs. You understand the use of text structures, and you select appropriate books. If you pick a book out that's way too hard, you go back and find another piece of text that you can understand. And this all leads to knowing that there's toolkits that a teacher has to have and a student has to have. Teachers have to have the right tool for the job. However, it won't do you any good to have a toolbox full of tools if you don't believe things can be fixed. And this goes way back to Module 1. Our expectation has to be there. We have to believe that these strategies can be taught and learned. So we have to have an understanding of the strategies that proficient readers use. We have to have resource books with techniques to teach these strategies. And I'm going to add websites and peers there. We just need the resources of techniques. We need a good assessment model that fits our teaching style. We need to remember Brian Camborne's conditions of learning. And we need to use short text selections because those are truly the best way to teach these things explicitly to students. And then the student's toolkit. Students need to have tools in their toolkit. They need to learn what the tools are, how they work, how to use them, and when to use them, as well as why to use them. So when they hit the bumps, they know what to go into their toolkit to use. It won't do any good for either the teacher or the students to have a toolbox full of tools if they don't know when and how to use them correctly to actually accomplish something. The ultimate goal of having tools is the creation of something new and improved. The best part for us as educators and learners is that there are only a handful of strategies that good readers use to comprehend text, and we know these strategies can be taught and learned. But remember Camborne's conditions for learning. These strategies are important enough to qualify for the time commitment needed to really learn something, like a hobby, a sport, or driving a car. So take the time to learn the strategies, learn the techniques to teach them, and make sure your students are able to practice and use them. Strategy instruction begins by assessing what a student knows how to do. If you have a group of ninth graders and you try out predicting with them, and most of them are really good at predicting. Maybe you find two that aren't. Those two you're going to work with separately, but you're probably not going to do a whole class lesson on prediction. You're going to take a look at some of the other strategies and see where they really need help. So you're going to determine strategies of focus. You can't possibly teach all of these strategies well in 1 year that you have students. So you're going to pick a few strategies of focus. Create awareness of the strategy, model and demonstrate the strategy. Lots of practice. Practice, practice, practice over here. Applying the strategy, applying the strategy, applying the strategy. Notice we don't have that you teach it, try it out, and done. That's not how learning works. There has to be lots of opportunity to apply. Assess use and understanding of strategy. Look to see which of your students now have that strategy. If some of them don't, you're going to pull them aside and work with them to continue. This is gradual release of responsibility, scaffolded instruction. And then you go back to look at strategies of focus again and go through the cycle. In the meantime, while you're going through this cycle, you're still pointing out these strategies you've already taught. You're pointing out when they're used, how they're used, so that they're not forgotten. All students must know why, when, and how. And this is your instructional framework. Remember this from one of the other PowerPoints. What a teacher does to structure instruction around before, during, and after reading is crucial to active and purposeful reading. So remember this definition, very important. What you do as the teacher to structure your instruction around before, during, and after reading is what we need to help, what we need to be able to help students. We want to make sure they're reading. We want to make sure the text is easy enough so that they have the mental energy to work on strategies. We want to make sure the text is short enough to complete within a cohesive time frame. You can't possibly teach a new strategy that's going to take a lot of mental energy with text that's too hard and can't be decoded, or with text that is 4 or 5 pages long and is going to take a week to read. You need short text. It needs to be on a reading level well below what the whole class can decode. And then you need to make sure your objectives for reading are clean, clear, connected, and understood by all. You're putting the objective up on the board. Today we're going to explore questioning, and here's how we're going to do it. So you're really making it clear. Here's why. A good reader questions, telling them why, and then you're practicing the strategy. There are 3 critical focus areas for strategic instruction. I'm going to introduce them in this PowerPoint, and then Module 4 is going to really focus on them. The 3 areas are before reading, and before reading you are focusing very much on activating prior knowledge, setting a purpose, previewing, predicting, and building background before they ever begin reading. Looking at clues like the title, pictures, charts, graphs, the author, the time period of the author, looking at the topic and thinking, what do we already know about this? Setting a purpose for reading. Why do we even care to read about this? What might it tell us? The during reading stage, active process of engagement with text to make meaning, check understanding, monitor comprehension, stop and summarize, make connections, ask questions, use fix-up strategies, evaluate predictions, and predict. We don't just turn them loose with the text and think that they're going to be okay. When we are working on actively teaching students, we have to sometimes stop them and ask them to understand what they're doing. Stop them and say, can you summarize this now that you've read this paragraph? And that helps them learn these strategies. And then after reading, so after we read, we don't just have them make a diorama. After reading, we summarize, we interpret, we evaluate, apply ideas, generate and share new ideas, go back to text, respond, retell. After reading is not about some cute little activity that is a response to reading all the time. It is very much about making the reading purposeful. Why did we read this? What did we get from it? And you want to try to connect your after reading activities to your activities you've done during and before. Just again in summary, before reading, those are the pieces that we need to focus on in before reading. Pre-reading teaching techniques get students ready to read, reduce perceived anxieties, encourage critical literacy, and prepare students to answer questions about the topic. During reading teaching techniques help students identify what's important, make connections, organize the material they're reading, interact both aesthetically and efferently, experience a variety of ways to read the text, and respond actively to the text. And after reading, post-reading techniques reinforce and extend ideas, clarify questions and misconceptions, help create structures to allow integration and assimilation of new knowledge, and can allow for social construction of meaning.